We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all people are created equal and born with certain unalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But all too often, that truth is forgotten. All too often, those rights are ignored, as all too many stand in silence and all too many suffer alone. So our work goes on until the land of the free is free of racism, until the home of the brave is brave enough to change, until by the people and for the people means doing right by all the people, until justice just is.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for this program, A State of the Union for Black Women. I'm Candace Presley in Atlanta. For more than 160 years, YWCA USA has been on a mission to eliminate racism, empower women, and promote peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. Since its inception, YWCAs across the country have been on the front lines advocating for the rights of women, girls, and marginalized communities for pay equity, affordable housing, healthcare reform, voting rights, and civil rights, to name a few. Today, YWCA serves more than 2 million women, girls, and family members of all ages and all backgrounds in more than 1,200 communities across 45 states and the District of Columbia. Today's event seeks to focus a lens on the current conditions impacting Black women, conditions such as racial injustice, economic security, and the COVID-19 pandemic, and to explore ways to forge a future where, as you heard, justice just is. In the book Caste, The Origins of Our Discontent, journalist Isabel Wilkerson uses metaphor describing America as an old house where the work is never done. And like old houses, America has an unseen skeleton, a caste system, that is as central to its operation as the studs and the joists that we cannot see in these buildings we call home. She writes, as we go about our daily lives, caste is the wordless usher in a darkened theater, flashlight cast down in the aisles, guiding us to our assigned seats. Her point is that the hierarchy of caste is not about feelings or morality. Instead, it is about power, which groups have it and which do not. For too long, Black women have rested at the bottom of America's caste system, but things are beginning to change. Today, we will hear from a panel of experts on how to continue moving that needle forward. It should be an exciting and informative conversation. Now to some housekeeping. The YWCA is a 501c3 nonprofit and thereby must strictly adhere to the IRS guidelines for charities and nonprofit organizations. To that end, the YWCA requests that no one speak specifically about political candidates or their campaigns. It's okay to talk about our government and our Congress. We know the midterms are coming, so it's okay to encourage people to register to vote, but not which party to support. It is now my pleasure to introduce the CEO of YWCA USA, Alejandra Castillo. Alejandra has over 2 decades of professional experience in our nation's capital, having served in senior leadership roles in 2 presidential administrations. She's worked in various public, private, and nonprofit settings. She, in fact, was the first Hispanic American to lead the Minority Business Development Agency under President Barack Obama, where, among other things in that role, she either created or retained more than 33,000 jobs. Please welcome YWCA CEO, Alejandra Castillo.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. And indeed, we are prepared for a very exciting conversation. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining this very important conversation today, State of the Union for Black Women. to remind you again and to center ourselves. This discussion is designed to draw a lens to current conditions such as racial injustice, economic security, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, among other issues that disproportionately impact Black women and girls. Our goal is to find ways to forge a future until justice just is. Too often, the issues that impact women, especially Black women, are referenced, but not given the proper depth of the urgency and the need to invest in areas that can improve the lives of Black women and create opportunities. We want to talk about those challenges, but we also want to identify the solutions and celebrate the successes. Today, you will hear from extraordinary leaders of organizations who are working to eliminate racism and empower Black women and their communities through research, programming, and services, as well as advocating for the policies that promote equity and justice for Black women and girls. It is our privilege to convene this amazing group of Black women leaders who I personally treasure and salute, because through them, we all grow our collective power to effectuate change. As we recognize that we at YWCA are calling Black Herstory Month, I want to take a moment to underscore our rich history as the oldest and largest women's organization in the nation. YWCA has always been as advocates for the health and well-being and empowerment of women, and we have always stood at the intersection of race and gender. In 1889, let me repeat that, in 1889, YWCA of Dayton became the first YWCA to open a branch for African American women and girls. And today it is led by an amazing YWCA leader, Shannon Isom. We have been fortunate to be the humble recipients of donations from Madam C.J. Walker, whose charitable contributions supported the empowerment of factory girls who frequented YWCA. And in 1946, we became the first racially integrated women's organization in the nation. Also, in 1970, the incredible Dr. Dorothy Height created our One Imperative, which declared to thrust our collective power towards the elimination of racism wherever it exists and by any means necessary. This statement drives our mission and the work that we do in over 1,200 communities every day. For 162 years, YWCA has served communities large and small all across our nation. And today we continue to work on those issues that impact women and communities of color. As we say, while not all YWCAs have pools, we help women when they feel like they're drowning. Throughout COVID-19, we did just that. We kept our doors open. We responded to the call of women facing growing domestic violence and sexual assault. We turned our child care centers to care for the children of healthcare workers and essential workers. And we found ways to answer the call of food insecurity and support local businesses. Our work is intentional, deliberate, and consistent. We do the work of justice until justice just is. With that, I would like to welcome a woman who is no stranger to YWCA or YWCA of Greater Los Angeles, the incomparable U.S. Representative Karen Bass, who represents the 37th Congressional District of California. We are tremendously grateful to Representative Bass for her vision and her unwavering commitment to advancing legislation that improves the lives of women and communities of color. With that, I turn it over to Representative Bass. Thank you.
Good afternoon, YWCA. Thank you so much for having me today to discuss the state of the Black woman in America. And what a time to have that discussion, as all of us just a little over a month ago watched the first Black woman to be sworn in as the Vice President of the United States. A wonderful time for a conversation and a wonderful historic moment. But first and foremost, I want to give a big shout out to one of my sheroes, the woman in charge, Faye Washington, President and CEO of the YWCA of Greater Los Angeles, someone who I have worked with for many years and someone who I have just tremendous admiration for. Devoted her life to fighting on behalf of our communities and our children. And Faye, you know you're my shero. Also, I want to welcome, congratulate, thank Alejandra Castillo, CEO of the YWCA USA, who will be stepping down after an incredible tenure, serving 2.3 million women and girls around the country. I want to thank you both for all that you do on our behalf. And I want to thank the YWCA for hosting this event to celebrate Black Herstory and to confront racial injustice as the YWCA has done for decades, and embrace economic security, address the disparities of the pandemic, and so much more. From its inception, the Y was fully integrated, making it one of the very first organizations to fully integrate in the entire country. And in this moment of racial equity, racial reckoning, as we all became aware nationally when we watched the public torture and execution of George Floyd last year, it's so important to know our own history and to know that there are organizations like the Y that didn't just discover we had a problem with systemic racism last year, but has been on the forefront of fighting against systemic racism for so many decades. So we showed throughout our history on November 3rd and then again in January 5th, it's the state of Black women in this country is strong, because without our leadership, without our participation, we wouldn't have sworn in the first Black woman vice president of the United States, and we wouldn't have 2 Democratic senators from the state of Georgia, an African-American male and a Jewish male. Unheard of in prior times, but it's because Black women have been on the forefront of fighting for change in this country that we were able to win those elections. But in the richest nation on the history of the world, moms, and especially Black moms, are dying at the highest rate. The idea that in 2021, any mother is dying in childbirth is just outrageous. And the idea that Black moms die at 3 to 4 times the rate of their white counterparts. I want you to know, to address this health crisis in America and to address the disproportionate way COVID has impacted our communities, the Congressional Black Caucus has been on the forefront. And alongside Congresswoman Lauren Underwood and Congresswoman Alma Adams here in the House, we have passed policies that are very important. As a matter of fact, the bill that we passed last time that we're going to introduce again this time is called the Momnibus Bill, the Momnibus Act of 2021, because the bill builds on existing legislation to comprehensively address every dimension of the maternal health crisis in America by making critical investments in the social determinants of health that influence the health outcomes like housing, transportation, and nutrition, and now, of course, dealing with COVID. But we've been fighting to make sure that community-based organizations that do this work on a day-to-day basis have the support that they need. So representation in our emergency rooms have become increasingly important in this pandemic, and we have to make sure that our sisters, mothers, aunts get vaccinated and understand that it was a Black woman that led the research in the vaccine. So we don't need to have the fears of this vaccine like we have had of past medication, because we know our history in the health field has not been positive at all. Everybody references Tuskegee, but I will reference forced sterilizations that have taken place in our country for far too long. As a matter of fact, a group of women went down to one of the immigrant detention centers just last year because forced sterilizations were taking place. Well, I also worry about our women, sisters, mothers, aunts that are incarcerated, and to make sure that they are taken care of. And so I'm working on comprehensive legislation to address women who are behind bars. And so last year I introduced the Pregnant Women in Custody Act. I introduced it again this year, and I also have a comprehensive bill to address the way women are treated who are incarcerated and in our criminal justice system from every aspect: arrest, incarceration, and when they leave. What happens to us is very specific, and so we want to address the root causes of why women get caught up in the system. I want to thank you so much for inviting me to speak with you today. And I want to let you know that next week we will be voting on the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. We have to always make sure that we remember girls and women who have been abused or killed at the hands of police. And so I want to say the state of Black women in this country is strong, and I know that especially as I look at the list of the women who are participating today, so that as long as we have them on our team, we can do everything to make the change we need in this country and the world. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Representative Bass, for those wonderful remarks. And yes, to say that the State of the Union for Black women is strong indeed. Why? Because we've always been strong. If there's one thing that's said about us, it is that. And how about an African-American female physician being the lead researcher behind the vaccine that has so disproportionately impacted so many of us? So yes, we are excited to be here today. It is now my pleasure to introduce you to this amazing, distinguished panel of experts for what we hope will be a conversation about moving the needle forward. And first, let me introduce Melanie Campbell. She is the president and the CEO of the National Coalition on Black Civic Participation. Also joining us today is Ava Blankston. She's the Chief Marketing and Communications Officer with the NAACP. Galen Burrows is Senior Policy Counsel, the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. Latifah Lyles, Vice President, Advocacy and Survivor Initiatives with Time's Up. And Dr. Cynthia Langtu, Professor Clinical Psych, the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. Ladies, welcome. Now, our conversation today, we hope, will spike additional questions from you. So please feel free to ask those questions in the chat, and we will be certain to pose those questions to members of the panel. I'd like to start our conversation today somewhat where Representative Bass left off with racial justice. She mentioned that there will be a vote on the George Floyd bill next week. Melanie Campbell, what are some of the key ways that systemic racism affects Black women in 2021? And how can we center Black women in our fight for racial justice?
Thank you, Candace, and thank you, my sister, Alejandra, and it's just an honor to always be here in space with my sisters here today. First and foremost, when we talk about racism, and it's definitely a fact, racism is a health hazard. It impacts our health. So we start there. And then you can go down any disparity, any challenge, and you're going to find whether it's health, whether it's economic, whether it's the criminal justice system, and so many other areas that impact our daily life, education. And one thing I'd like to just point out about education is we may be getting the higher degrees than many, but we still end up not making the kind of money of a white man, no matter how much education we get. So we're in this moment, we're in this reckoning of a year of COVID that shows that more disparities. But we also are overcomers, and we have the power, which is why we showed up the way we did, nonpartisanly speaking, to shift power in this country, because we are saying no more. And so for Black women and the women that I know and the shoulders we stand on, it's that time, and we're saying we're owning that power so that those disparities are flipped, and we're going to make the demands that we need to make sure that this next generation that's coming has much better opportunities even than we did, and we had a lot in my generation.
Dr. Langtu, would you please weigh in on this same question, making women, Black women, the center of this fight for racial justice?
Yeah. So thank you so much for those statements. And thank you for having me. This is an honor. So I would say historical oppression coupled with current racial trauma can and has resulted in racialized trauma, right? And what do I mean by that? I call it gaslighting on the macro. And what that means to me is seeing and knowing that we are systematically being treated as less than, but then also systematically being told that we're not. So it feels like you don't even know what's going on for yourself. What else does it look like, right? What else can it look like for Black women in particular? It can look like internalized racism, right? So we're taking on views of others, of ourselves, and we're taught to doubt our beauty, right? It can impact self-esteem, depression, anxiety, and even possibly post-traumatic stress. We've seen the disparities in healthcare, and as a Black mother, this one hits so close to home. It can make me fear for my children, what's going to happen to them, particularly as Black presenting boys. So all of this coupled together can really feel painful for Black women in particular. I would say also another piece that's important is that as Black women, we're both hyper-visible and invisible at the same time. And it can feel so disorienting. And we have to move through the world with that sense of disorientation. But I would also say this, as Black women, we know that all of this is wrapped in a deep knowing of who we truly are. And we learn that from the stories of strength of our ancestors, from seeing ourselves in the writings of Dr. Maya Angelou, Toni Morrison, Octavia Butler, and of course, Amanda Gorman. And so how do we center, right, Black women in this narrative? Listen to Black women. Continue to shine an unwavering light on both the pain and disparities, as well as the strengths that Black women have historically and currently bring to our union. I would say that's how we center Black women.
If I could follow, oh, yes, please. I see that, Galen, and I was going to give you the next question anyway, but please, you would like to weigh in, do so.
Yes, and thank you to my panelists, and thank you to YWCA. I just wanted to raise at one point. The question that you asked was, how do we center Black women? And I think that's really interesting because we never asked that question about how do we center white men. We just do it, right? All of our policies have done it. It's not that we don't know how to center Black women, it's that we haven't. And we already know how to examine things from a racial and gender lens. It's just that the default has always been white men. So, to the extent that racism is a public health crisis, that just as Dr. Langton was talking about and Melanie Campbell was talking about, it's also an economic crisis, it's a social crisis, it's a cultural crisis, then it goes on and on. We have the tools to counteract that. It's whether or not we have the will.
We have the tools, but do we have the will? There you go. Galen, earlier this year, in addition to welcoming a new administration, we kicked off the start of the 117th Congress. It is the most ethnically and racially diverse in American history. Talk to us about policies or actions that these elected officials need to enact, which will align greatly with the interest of Black women and our families.
Well, we need immediate COVID relief. COVID has really impacted Black families, Black communities. We've been hard hit. We're much more likely to suffer from COVID and die. We have higher death rates. And so we need immediate COVID relief. We also need an infusion of cash, right? Black women have also lost their jobs. Black women are paid less. We need stimulus money. We needed it long ago. We also need an infusion of cash into the childcare infrastructure. If we're going to be able to have any type of economic security, we need to have a stable childcare system. We need that for people who to be able to work, but we also need that for the Black women who are predominantly working in childcare jobs and caregiving jobs. The other thing that I want to mention is that we absolutely must raise the minimum wage. If we raise the minimum wage to $15 and eliminate the tip minimum wage has been $2.13 an hour since forever. That would lift people out of poverty. About a third of Black workers would get a raise. This is particularly important for tip workers, and I just want to underscore this because the practice of tipping is a legacy of slavery. It was a practice instituted so that employers would not have to pay Black workers. They externalized that cost. Also, it's a way to perpetuate poverty. Many women are in tipped occupations. Many Black women are in tipped occupations. It's time to end the tip minimum wage and to raise the wage to a living wage so that people have a shot to make ends meet.
Latifah Lyles, if you would weigh in on this point and also speak to the issue of the minimum wage. The last time the minimum wage was increased, it had to be slipped into the Defense Authorization Bill, which passed with 80 votes, 80% of the vote, that is.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's just great to be part of this very distinguished panel today at such a critical time. As my sisters on the panel have said, Black women right now are facing a unique set of challenges in the economy and in the workplace. And these are not things that we have not been talking about for decades. And how all these things come together today, whether we're talking about participation in the workforce, equity and dignity with work, that includes a living wage, that includes a minimum wage that you can live on and not have to work 2 and 3 jobs. The other piece of it is when you are having dignity at work, what does that look like? We talk about wages a lot. We should be talking about fair treatment, equity, working on issues related to sexual harassment and abuse, which is in the news now more than ever before. We know that this pandemic has laid bare how women are treated, how Black women are treated in the workforce. Tip workers is a perfect example of how, when you know you're one of the few that didn't get laid off, how likely are you to raise your hand and say, hey, I'm not being treated well? We have a unique opportunity in this moment. And in addition to a robust public investment, including raising the minimum wage, a care infrastructure so that the people we know have to do care and work, how we pay caregivers, the structural issues are laid bare today. A lot of this is behavioral, but we know so much of it is our infrastructure. Our infrastructure was not designed for people like us to make it work. It was not designed for caregivers to participate and to advance in their careers. It's time to make systemic changes in these systems, and COVID and the pandemic, I think, has allowed more people to raise their voices on these issues than ever before. We won't go into all of the data. We have so much that shows the disparate impact that women and Black women have faced during this past year, but it really is only the tipping point.
Ava, I wanted to get you in on this point as well, because I've been watching your eyes and I can tell that you have some thoughts on this issue also.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you to all my sister leaders on the panel as well. I know we were talking about an infusion of cash, and that is definitely needed. Some of the things that we've been focused on at the NAACP are in regards to small businesses, small Black-owned businesses who have been very hard hit during this COVID pandemic. And we know that most of those owners are Black women, 67%, that are in our ecosystem that, say the thing that they need most is capital to grow their business and grow their footprint in community. And they are supporting community. And so, some of the things that we've done is partnering with Beyonce's Be Good Foundation to give small grants. We've done that for businesses, most of which have gone to Black women. We've done grants with Experian on housing. And so, some of these things are just the basics to keep people in their homes, keep people to ensure that people have the ability to care for their families. And we know that Black women are the leaders. They are the leaders in our communities. They're the leaders in our homes. And so to stand them up and to prop them up in this moment, I think is very important. And so, you know, we know that the PPP, regardless of what Congress had intended, actually went to corporations and folks that are actually of means, and not the small businesses that we need in our communities. And so some of the things that we need to advocate for is just ensuring that Congress does their job in providing the relief, both on the health side and then also on the economic side.
Ava Blankston, thank you for that. Let's talk a little bit about the data when it comes to racial injustice. So alarmed by the gendered narrative that has emerged on police violence and brutality, the YWCA undertook a media review for the years 2017 to 2020, examining the extent to which women and girls of color continue to be criminalized and racially profiled by law enforcement. In their We Still Deserve Safety report, YWCA paints a disturbing picture of the gendered racial profiling and criminalization that girls and women of color continue to experience. Latifah Lyles, in a time when there still hasn't been justice for Breonna Taylor or Sandra Bland, what can we do to ensure that Black women are at the forefront when it comes to law enforcement reform?
Mm-hmm. So, you know, I'm so glad that you raised this question and that we're talking about centering Black women. And the first thing I will say is that Black women need to be part of the solution. Black women need to be at the table when we're talking about what violence and over-policing looks like in our community. The intersections for Black women in that situation are unique. In fact, they're unique even in comparison to Black men. How women feel safe in our communities, how we make decisions about our families, how we interact with law enforcement. We are dealing with those intersections every single day. And on the issue of safety, I have to say that one thing that we're really focusing on this year is we believe it's time to get real about the cycle of stereotypical bias and racist, sexist narratives that perpetuate violence in the Black communities as well. We know that women are harmed and girls, and that experience is rooted in a legacy of historical and cultural narratives, including over-sexualization, adultification, and the strength that Black women must hold. And so what we are trying to do in thinking about what safety means is putting it all up there on the table. It means safety within our community. It means safety interacting with the criminal system. And it also means safety when we decide to speak up. So what we're hoping to do with this new program, we as ourselves, that we just launched yesterday. So this is hot off the presses, in partnership with Me Too, the National Women's Law Center. We are trying to center Black survivors of sexual assault and sexual violence and sexual harassment, including in the workplace, like we never have before. We want to fight for those survivors and those women. We want to upend the historical and cultural narratives. And we want to create conditions where Black survivors can be heard, believed, and supported. And so the data shows that 6 in 10 Black women report being subjected to coercive sexual contact by age 18. And that for every Black woman who reports rape, at least 15 do not. How we interact with the criminal justice system is so critical to our safety on an everyday basis. And then there's another piece of this that isn't our expertise, but on the psychological and the health outcomes that are connected to safety are so critical as well. The health outcomes and how we interact with those systems when we are feeling unsafe perpetuate the cycles as well.
Thank you for that, Ms. Lyles. Dr. Langtu, she just really teed that up for you because I was coming to you next to ask about Black women standing up for ourselves, especially when it comes to the healthcare disparities that exist, and then just making sure that we are taking care of ourselves mentally and emotionally because of the way historically we have been treated?
Thank you so much for that question. You know, there's a tension that I hold with the idea of the strong Black woman, right? And that tension is this, that I think that there's a way that the Black women in my life, that the Black women that I've known, on whose shoulders I stand, who hold my arms up, are such a blessing. But I think there's a way that historically so much has been put on the backs of Black women, and Black women have borne that, you know, and shown their strength through it, but that their needs are not seen, right? Our needs are not seen in that tension. And that's what I want to focus on. I want to focus on the importance of the fact that historically Black women have had to be strong, that we've had systems in place that have not been for us, by us, about us. And so we've had to find our ways into academia, into healthcare, and we've had to advocate for those pieces. The health disparities that we see today that are laid bare, I loved what my fellow panelists said earlier, that are laid bare by what's happening with COVID-19, are health disparities that were there before. There are ways that we've known how we have to have a louder voice, but then are also, you know, seen as less than if we have a louder voice. But we've known that we have to stand up for ourselves, for our children, for our parents in the healthcare system. And to see that health disparity play out in COVID-19, but also in folks not being able to approach resources in the way that they could because of historical patterns that have happened is really painful. And so what I would say is the importance of naming what has happened historically, right? Not just within our community, but broadly speaking, right? That we know that the systemic disparities that have occurred in the healthcare system are seen by the larger healthcare system, and that our voices and our historical pain and current pain are being centered is critical in moving towards folks seeking out more resources. And I can't say enough about making sure then that each of us are making sure that we're resourced and that we have what we need, but then also so that we can provide that for others. We can't provide what we don't have. And so it's important that we're taking really good care of ourselves as we move towards taking really good care of our friends, families, and communities.
Galen Burrows, I see you nodding your head. Go ahead.
So as Dr. Langtu was speaking, I kept thinking about what Congresswoman Bass was saying about the COVID vaccine and vaccine hesitancy and resources and sort of trauma that has been felt by Black communities because of medical racism and exploitation. And I think that it's so important that we address those things head on and that we have resources for organizations on the ground to have community-based outreach to people about the vaccine, about how to take care of themselves, but also that we have policy-oriented solutions. You know, one of the reasons why there's been some vaccine hesitancy in Black communities, some of the data shows, is that folks are worried about what will happen after they take the vaccine. Will there be side effects? Will I get sick? And that is really something that we need to address, given that a lot of workers in frontline industries don't have access to health insurance in the Black community. So, you know, something like 14% of grocery, convenience, and drugstore workers who are Black do not have health insurance. Almost 10% of Black people working in healthcare don't have health insurance. So we need to address some of these policies also while we are, you know, making sure that people have information, resources, and the know-how to take care of themselves and their families, because as Dr. Langtu said, Black women are the trusted resources in their communities and in their families. And we have to make sure that they have the information and resources to protect their families and their communities.
Latifah Lyles, you had your hand up, and then Melanie Campbell, I see you as well. Latifah, you go first. I want to hear what you have to say.
So I want to just build on that. We just did a project with Color Change, the Employment Law Project on the Worker Institute at Cornell University. And this paper that we did came out, it was called The Foundations for a Just and Inclusive Recovery. And the reason that we're calling it a just and inclusive recovery is because we can't take it for granted. Just and inclusive recovery have to address the economic security, health and safety, and agency and voice in this pandemic. And I just wanted to bring it back to what those solutions are going to look like has to be intentional. It has to be addressing the rate at which we are losing jobs, the rate at which we are dying, and the rate at which we are living every single day with economic insecurity, that no one should at this time.
Melanie Campbell, you wanted to weigh in on this point also.
Yes, and I two things that are happening right now, right, is that we need to be pushing to make sure that we have the recovery we need. That's going on as we're sitting here on this call, and many of you are already weighing in. I think it's really important that this recovery plan is passed and keep things like the $15 an hour as far as dealing with the economic crisis in this country. The other thing that's actually really happening on the ground, and that we know through our work at the Black Women's Roundtable and with a lot of our partners, is that it's also about how the access to COVID-19. All my friends know I survived COVID-19 and was, thank God, a few months ago, and kind of lived the realities of the disparities, even as somebody who fights for civil rights and social justice, and the advocacy that's needed to navigate and what are the decision points that are made. If we know that African Americans and people of color, Latinos specifically, die at higher rates, why is it? Who makes the decision about who stays in the hospital? Who doesn't stay in the hospital? Who gets remdesivir, right? Who gets the plasma treatment? And I have, since I've been out, I was in the ICU for 3 weeks and doctors didn't make it. And so knowing that if I didn't have advocates, even being an activist, I had to have advocates to keep me in the hospital long enough to survive it, and knowing that I had 7 people in my family who got it in Atlanta, and a niece who had bypass surgery at 42 years old in February, got COVID, but from another family member, and they sent her home after she tested positive. And the next day she was in an ambulance because she couldn't breathe. And my sister, who she lives with, was also tested positive. She's 7 years old with all kinds of health disparities. They sent all of them home. She was 2 days later in an ambulance and almost didn't make it. So it's like also how this thing is being done with treatment, the access issues when it comes to not just, and I agree, Galen, that there are the things that concern us when it comes to history, when it comes to vaccinations. And it's also access. It's also making the right decisions about if you have one person in the house that gets the vaccination and everybody else doesn't, what have you solved? So looking at zip codes, looking at because what's happening is in my hometown of Florida, small place, Mims, Florida, I get calls from folks that say, hey, we can't get on the list. But people are coming into the community because it's in the right zip code with the higher rates of death, but yet the people who are getting the vaccine are not our people. So those are some of the things I think that we need to get that passed. Also, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. We just was a part of a coalition of civil rights leaders who yesterday really pushed it out there that we need to get these things passed. And I can't talk about this without talking about the realities that we voted nonpartisanly to give people the power to make it happen. And I've been in this town long enough to know if you don't push it now, you're not going to get it. And so we have to raise our voices as Black women because we are that secret sauce. We gave certain folks the power to go ahead and take care of it. So we, friends or foe, we need people to push, and Black women have to be very dogmatic, I'm a Southern girl. I can be respectful, but I can still also challenge you to use every means that you have, because it's a state of emergency. Our people are dying on the line, from unjust policing to COVID-19 and a whole lot of stuff in between.
Ava Blankston, you've been nodding your head and agreeing with things that Melanie has said. And we've reported it here in Atlanta that when you look at the numbers of people who are getting the vaccine, it's not people who look like Black women.
And there's the notion that we are hesitant. And on one hand, we want information. We have every right to get information. But it is not fair for us to seek information, not get in the information, and then have other people coming to our communities and take the vaccines. We are ready. There are folks right now who are ready, who are calling, the Melanie Campbells, they're calling to see, where can I get on the line? Where do I need to go? How do I need to access it? So this notion that we keep going around, that we are hesitant and therefore we can let other people come in and sort of get in front of the line, I think we need to kind of stop that. I think we need to provide the information for those who are ready to take the vaccine now, and then also give information to those who just want answers. And that is fine, and they should have the answers. As Representative Bass said, those who have developed the vaccines look like us. For once, they look like us. And so I think for all of us, part of this is just getting information out. We spent much of the last year, quite frankly, the last 4 years, right, Melanie, organizing and mobilizing and educating. And we have done a lot of work to get to this place where there are people in seats that can help us get the policies that we want. And now we are knocking on the door saying, these are the policies that we want. We want the George Floyd Policing Act. We want, to understand how police departments around the country are funded. We want to know how we can divert some of that money to our communities. We want to know how we can better our environmental justice so that we're not beholden to the conditions that make us more vulnerable. We have been talking about this for years and years and years, and now is the time. We have spoken up, we have marched, we have cried, we have laid in hospitals. It is time now for us to take action.
The time is now indeed to take action. We want to let our audience know, who's engaged with us on Facebook or YouTube or on many of the social media platforms where our forum is being broadcast, that you too are invited to participate in the conversation. If you have questions, just post them in the chat and we will position those questions to the members of our panel. Ava, I wanted to stay with you though on this economic issue, because as you said, we've put people in office, Black women have put people in office and empowered them to enact an agenda that will be beneficial to Black women. Talk to me about some of the challenges economically that Black women are facing right now, especially in the era of COVID.
Well, we have talked about the minimum wage. We have talked about the wage gap. There's also the student debt piece that we want to continue to harp on, because that is a stimulus in a way. Making sure that we take the debt so that we can get the education. And Melanie talked about it early on. We are getting the education, but then we're still making less. And because we have to pay more to get that education. And so we are working with Congresswoman Presley and others to really address the student debt that is hampering us and keeping us from not even building wealth. Just getting, just standing up sometimes. And so I think that's another piece that we need to focus on, is that student debt piece.
I'd like to engage in a little rapid fire with our panel right now. As we are talking to this audience, and you ladies, you amazing panel of Black Girl Magic are doing work on the front lines. For each of you, what is one thing that a woman in our audience can do today, tomorrow, next week to begin to affect change? And I'm going to start with you, Ms. Lyles.
Thank you.
Latifah? Yes.
I'm here. Thank you. I think the one thing that folks can do is that they can say that they will pledge to center Black women. And that includes our community and beyond, to say we support you, we hear you, and we are in solidarity, whether that is addressing issues of safety or jobs or health. We're fighting for a future when Black women are truly heard and supported and treated fairly. And so that's one thing I would say.
Melanie Campbell, one thing.
Thank you. Our Essence Black Women's Roundtable poll told us for the last few years that Black women want to deal with the issue. Number one issue is dealing with eradicating structural systemic racism is number one. Number two, criminal justice and policing reform. And number three, in this time, COVID-19. So I tell Black women, own your power, push your elected officials that you help deliver to the White House and to this House and the Senate, no matter what party they are, whether you voted for them or not, they work for you. So own your power and demand that they address the issues that you know that you took your life in your hands to vote and vote for. So own your power.
Own your power. Cynthia Lang, too. One thing.
I'd say be fierce about taking really good care of your emotional and spiritual and mental well-being. Be fierce about it. Carve out space for each other to really take care of ourselves and to make sure that our systems are in place that allow for that, so that our healthcare provides spaces for Black women to be able to seek out the help that they need.
Galen Burroughs, the one thing a Black woman can do to improve the state of our union.
I'm going to piggyback a little bit off of what Melanie said. Own your power, but get your friends. Organize. And call on your representatives to deliver for our communities. Organize, organize, organize.
And Ava Blankston, you're going to get the final thought on this.
Support Black women. We know what we go through every day. We know what it is. And so, the old adage is lifting as you climb. There, no matter where you are in the station, no matter where you are, you can help other Black women. You can support Black businesses. You can support the work that each of us is doing every day. And if we sort of lift each other up, we'll lift up our communities as well.
Thank you for that, ladies. And at the start of our program, we suggested that perhaps things might be changing, that needle might be moving more forward in our favor. I'm curious, yes or no, do you think that this reckoning that we are in the middle of, that it is sustainable and we are indeed in a moment where we can affect real change? Ava, I'm gonna go in reverse order and start with you.
We are in a moment where we can affect real change. We just have to grab it and push, because it's not going to come to us if we don't demand it. And I think we're demanding. I think we're demanding. And so I think we can actually make some change this time.
Galen Burroughs.
I think that we can make change too. I just want to say one quick story about my 11-year-old daughter. Who for Halloween told me she wanted to dress as Kamala Harris, and she made her own I'm speaking button, and she went around the neighborhood. Representation matters. I'm thrilled that she has known Black people in power and seen their leadership, and that she has something that she can aspire to. But I think that we are building power for Black women, and I think that we will continue to do that.
Cynthia Lang, too. Is this a real moment that's sustainable?
Absolutely. I would say that not only can we affect change as Black women, we have been. Historically, we have been. It's what we have done. It's what we do. It's what my mama did. It's what your grandma did. It's what our great-grandmamas did. We have. It just so happens that there has been a light, right? A spotlight on that in recent months. And my hope is that we would continue to shine that spotlight on what we have and will continue to do, whether or not the light is shining.
All right, last two, and this is our last question. We're about to wrap this thing up. Melanie Campbell, this is a sustainable moment?
Oh, most definitely. I'll say follow Black women if you want to win. And like my sister Ywca, who leads Win with Black Women, we have the power. We're going to use it, and we're not going to let you abuse it.
All right, and Latifah Lyles, you get the last word today.
Absolutely. I think we're at a perfect moment. The confluence of movements coming together is going to be really critical right now. We're not in our silos anymore, and we've got to embrace the leadership and keep their feet to the fire. But we've also got to link arms ourselves, because doing it together and moving forward together is going to be ever more powerful.
Absolutely. Indeed, we need to be the change that we want to see. Ladies, thank you so much. Indeed, an informative, enlightening, and distinguished panel. It's my pleasure now to hand our program back to our leader, Alejandra. Ms. Castillo?
Thank you so much. Wow. I know that we could sit for many, many hours just having this conversation, going deeper, being more strategic, but I have to extend just such gratitude on behalf of YWCAs across the country. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Candace, thank you so much for moderating. I know how hard it is to moderate when you have such powerful, intelligent, smart, strategic women who have amazing things to say. So thank you for this, for that work. And to the panelists, Melanie, you know I am a huge fan of yours. I send you a big, big hug. Latifah, Galen, Cynthia, Abba, thank you. Your words have touched us and have inspired us. So I just took a few notes, and forgive me for looking down, but this is truly a moment to seize, a moment to make sure that we work together across the aisles, across our nation, but it centering, as was mentioned so often, really centering this work around Black women. And I join all the work of YWCA around that. But I also want to take a few notes from what was said. Owning your power, but making sure yet you do it with your friends. Taking care of yourself. This conversation about self-care. It's wonderful to push and make change and effectuate change, but we also need to center our self-care. Organize, organize, and organize. Those words ring true from my friend Melanie Campbell, because that is what YWCA does and we will continue to do. Supporting Black women and supporting Black-owned businesses, indeed. Not only are we going through this She session, but we need to make sure that women of color who have had to bear the brunt of this COVID pandemic, as well as Black-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses. Lifting each other up, what powerful words. And then, as was said, this is the confluence of movements coming together, our moment, making sure that not only we make change that's necessary for our communities today, but that we wear the futuristic hat of what do we need to do to make sure that our systems, that the ecosystem can support Black women in terms of opportunities, growth, and leading. We are thankful. We are thankful to the panelists, to the moderators, to Representative Bass, and to you all who took time to be with us today. I want to make sure that you all can not only listen to what was said today, but more importantly, the call to action. The call to action is that we all have a role to play, and we need to ask ourselves, what role will we play? Will we be advocates? Are we going to make sure that we call our members of Congress to ensure that legislation is passed that benefit our communities? Are we going to run for office? As women of color, as Black women, what is our role? And how do we bring others with us? So with that call to action, I want to end today's program and today's event thanking and being very grateful. The gratitude to everyone who joins us, not only today, but every day at YWCA, because we continue to eliminate racism and empower women until justice just is. Thank you very much for everyone.
Indeed. Thank you very much, everyone, for being with us today. And to learn more about how the YWCA is working in this field, please visit us at ywca.org. Again, thank you, everyone, and good afternoon.
For over 160 years, YWCA has been on a mission to eliminate racism, empower women, and promote peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. For all. That means women and girls, people of color, victims of domestic and sexual violence, for survivors and fighters and builders of all kinds. A tall order, right? Not with your help. As our nation nurses the deep wounds of racial injustice and the COVID-19 pandemic rages on, YWCA's work has never been more urgent. Women have been hit hard by lost jobs, lost wages, and lost childcare. Girls are missing school time while their families struggle with financial uncertainty, and communities of color are struggling under the weight of COVID-19's disparate impact on their health and the devastation of racial injustice. At YWCA, we hear their voices every day. We work directly with real people living real lives. We know the crises facing our nation right now are enormous, but together, we have the power to make a difference, to pass legislation and establish policies that give communities the resources to rebuild so that women and girls can thrive. Yes, together, because none of us can go it alone. With your help, we can bolster childcare and early learning programs for working mothers. We can protect survivors of violence of all kinds. We can build economic security, fair workplaces, racial equity, and mental health support for women and families in need. With your help, we can mend the pieces of our fractured nation. Sit with us. Let's talk about the path forward. Let's rebuild together.